session, both of you. Over to you, and I'm there in the chat there if you need me.
Thank you, Sean. So as you just heard, I'm Penelope Woolf, and together with my colleague Jane Digby, we're going to be discussing student wellbeing with you today. So we both work on impact research at OUP, and we're really delighted to have the opportunity to share some of the findings from a research or impact study that we commissioned, which was about the links between wellbeing and academic achievement in schools. So thank you so much for listening to us, and a warm welcome. So as presenters, as Sean said, we're not going to be looking at the chat, so please do put your questions in the Q&A and we'll get through as many of these at the end as we can. And again, as Sean's just mentioned, there is a handout for you to follow up on anything we've spoken about, and it's also got a list of references if you want to follow up on any of the topics in more detail. So in recent years, policymakers and practitioners have increasingly focused their attention on the importance of student wellbeing. And it goes without saying that recent events have emphasised this as students try to cope with an unprecedented amount of change in the ways in which they live and learn. This session focuses on research in the form of an impact study that we commissioned to inform a new Oxford International curriculum. The impact study included research from many different countries to better understand any potential links between wellbeing and academic attainment, as well as other educational outcomes, a relatively new topic for researchers. It has a particular focus on whole school approaches to promoting wellbeing and explores the factors that contribute towards an effective strategy and implementation. So although the Oxford International Curriculum is a new curriculum being developed for international schools all over the world, we felt that the findings would be interesting to you and can be used to inform different contexts. So we're going to be covering what is Oxford Impact and what is an impact study, what is student wellbeing and why does it matter, what we're calling an evidence analysis impact study on the Oxford International Curriculum, and we'll tell you what an evidence analysis impact study is, what the Oxford International Curriculum is, and what the research was about. And then we'll go into the research findings, which is what we discovered. We'll then move on to effective and promising strategies for fostering student wellbeing. We'll move towards the end to key takeaways, how to find out more, and then there'll be time for questions at the very end. So I'm now going to hand you over to Jane, who's going to talk to you about impact studies at Oxford University Press.
Thanks, Penelope, and welcome everyone. So before we talk about wellbeing and the impact study itself we carried out on the Oxford International Curriculum, let's just take a look at OUP's approach to evaluating impact. So Oxford Impact is Oxford University Press's approach to evaluating the impact that our educational products and services have on teaching and learning. So teachers, learners, senior leaders, parents, and even carers can be sure that they make a positive difference. As a department of the University of Oxford, improving educational outcomes is core to our mission. And as you would expect, everything we develop at OUP is created with rigour and care to ensure that it will help to engage learners and deliver results. And as part of this commitment, we developed Oxford Impact. At the heart of Oxford Impact is the Oxford Impact Framework. This is a rigorous process for evaluating impact developed with the National Foundation for Educational Research, which is a UK charity, and supported by the Department of Education at the University of Oxford. We are very proud to have worked with these highly respected organisations to create a trustworthy and robust framework, giving reassurance around the integrity and consistency of how we evaluate and report on impact. So, what is an impact study? So an impact study assesses the change a product or a service has on the people or group of people it is intended to help or benefit. So these could be learners, teachers, senior leaders, parents, or carers. And the impact study investigates changes that have taken place and the extent to which these changes can be attributed to a particular product or services. So examples include, has a reading scheme improved pupils' engagement? Has a math scheme led to progress? So we're asking if the product is doing what it was intended to do. So since the launch of Oxford Impact in 2016, we've completed 60 impact studies involving over 11,000 participants in 79 countries. 14 of these impact studies were about evaluating English language teaching products or services in countries all around the world. But before we talk specifically about the impact study on the Oxford International Curriculum, let's just think about why student wellbeing is important and, just why it matters. So OUP recently ran a survey to understand a bit more about how schools were tackling wellbeing. And you can see here that it said that 87% of UK respondents and 90% of international respondents indicated that wellbeing is a priority to a great or moderate extent in their schools, which is great news. The survey also highlighted that the top 3 ways in which international teachers said they will be providing wellbeing support are, so 64% said they will find opportunities to cover wellbeing as part of their lessons, 58% said they will use curriculum programs with wellbeing content within them, 54% will do something on an ad hoc basis and for pupils or students who need it. But encouragingly, almost 90% of international teachers indicated that their schools will be providing wellbeing support to teaching staff in the next 12 months. So that's great news. So what we want to find out now is what your educational establishment is doing. So we're just going to take a quick poll to get a feel for how much focus wellbeing gets within your educational establishment. So Sean, could you please start poll 1? So you should see some options appear on your screen now. So what I would like to ask you is to select one of the answers. And once you have answered, you can see the results of the poll if you click on the polls button in your right-hand panel. So the numbers are creeping up. That's great. I think we're almost there. I think you've pretty much answered. So what we're seeing is that most of you are saying that your establishment focuses sort of between a little, adequate, and yeah, quite a few doing a lot on wellbeing. So that's great. Only 5% are saying it's fully embedded, and hopefully after this session we'll have given you some really good ideas of how you can move that towards being fully embedded within your establishment. So Sean, could you please close the poll? So what do we mean by student wellbeing? Now, most teachers know that happy students learn better. However, an unavoidable complication involved in unpacking the concept of wellbeing and its relationship to other outcomes for students is that the term wellbeing does have different meanings and definitions. So some authors use wellbeing as a term for general happiness, others as a term for encompassing physical and mental health, while others frame wellbeing as a component of physical and/or mental health. It is also important to note that in this particular presentation, we are specifically focusing on student well-being as opposed to general well-being. And one well-known approach to defining well-being is by American psychologist and educator Martin Seligman, who designed the PERMA model, which you should be able to see on your screen. So this represents what he classifies as the 5 core elements of happiness and well-being. So we've got positive emotions, engagement, positive relationships, meaning, and accomplishments. But despite the use of different terms and meanings, ultimately we need to start with the question, why is well-being so important? We all know by now that it is fundamental to the overall health of an individual. The past experiences, attitudes, and outlook can all impact well-being, as can physical or emotional trauma following specific incidents. Low levels of well-being and high levels of mental health problems have adverse consequences for all aspects of health and development of the young, and they are usually the precursor to difficulties in adulthood and are strongly connected with poverty, disadvantage, and deprivation, both as causes and as outcomes. What we have found is that students who are happy and healthy tend to develop and improve concentration, motivation, and energy levels, develop coping skills for life, build and maintain better relationships, successfully overcome difficulties, and are more likely to continue with and be successful in their academic studies. It is also important to note that future employers value soft skills such as emotional resilience, adaptability, and lateral thinking, making it even more important that educators of today focus on developing these skills to support their students' academic, personal, and professional successes. So I'm now going to hand you back to Penelope, who will talk about the evidence analysis impact study.
Thank you, Jane. Now let's take a closer look at the impact study for the Oxford International Curriculum. The impact study we are discussing today is an evidence analysis impact study, which I'm going to refer to from now on as an evidence analysis. So what is an evidence analysis? Well, it seeks to find and analyse a range of literature, so this could be research articles, books, etc., on a specific topic of interest to uncover evidence and create an overall picture. As we mentioned earlier, the evidence analysis was commissioned to inform the Oxford International Curriculum, and this is an impact-driven, research-based, international integrated curriculum from early years through primary, lower secondary, international GCSEs, right through AS and A-levels. And it includes 4 components: the curriculum itself, which covers 4 core subjects, as well as resources, formative and summative assessment, and continuous professional development. The Oxford International Curriculum offers a new approach to teaching and learning, focused on well-being and global skills development, and it aims to put joy at the heart of learning in order to promote personal, academic, and career success. Well-being and global skills are taught both as additional standalone subjects and interwoven across the 4 core subjects. It's an integrated approach based on the science of positive education, with an emphasis on developing physical and mental well-being throughout the educational experience of each student, as well as important skills and competencies such as critical and creative thinking. It is this focus that prompted the impact study to look at the relationship between well-being and student outcome. We believe this approach translates well to other teaching contexts such as yours. The purpose of this evidence analysis was to review evidence on the links between well-being and academic attainment, as well as other key non-academic, so for example, social, emotional outcomes. The overarching research question was, to what extent does the promotion of well-being in schools lead to improved educational outcomes? And this broke down into 3 distinct areas of research. What academic research is there to indicate that student well-being can improve academic attainment? In what way does a curriculum centred on the principles of well-being lead to improved physical and emotional health and associated educational outcomes? What specific strategies are linked with positive outcomes, academic or otherwise? So there were several meetings that we had at OUP to discuss and agree the focus of the research. And this slide captures the search parameters and the criteria. One of the key issues with any evidence analysis is whether there is enough existing research to draw on, especially if we were to be very narrow and specific with the search. So for this impact study, we looked at lower secondary, so that's 11 to 15-year-olds, although some primary level research was also useful. We looked at literature published in the English language in international settings and the UK. We looked at research from the last 5 to 7 years, so that was 2013 to 2020. And in terms of the type of literature, this was academic journals, scholarly texts, research reports, articles on websites, and books. The evidence analysis was undertaken by Dr. Ariel Lindorff at the Department of Education, University of Oxford. And here we're going to listen to her sharing some of the findings. Sean, could you please start the video?
In brief, there's robust evidence from studies in a wide range of countries across the world in, for example, Europe, Asia, North and South America, Australasia, that show there's a positive relationship between well-being and academic attainment. Although different studies come to varying conclusions about how strong that relationship really is. Well-being has been similarly found to be positively related to student engagement and a number of other outcomes such as positive transitions between primary and secondary school, creativity, and the academic success of students compared to their parents. There don't seem to be any consistent patterns in terms of these relationships being stronger or weaker for certain groups of students, for example, by demographic characteristics, although there's a limited amount of research on this. Looking then at whole school approaches to promoting well-being in particular, the evidence varies a bit. There is a good amount of evidence from experimental and quasi-experimental studies in different countries around the globe, such as the USA, Australia, Bhutan, Mexico, and Peru, that show positive effects on academic attainment. Some other studies have shown positive effects on other outcomes, like motivation, self-esteem, lower dropout rates, and less problem behavior. This is true based on evidence from lower as well as higher income countries. Where studies have not found effects of promoting well-being on student outcomes, there is some indication in the literature that this may relate to implementation problems, such as lack of structure and consistency in the whole school approach, lack of monitoring, or lack of time and resources. Based on the evidence, some of the specific strategies that are advisable in whole school approaches include tailoring and accounting for the specific school context, including self-assessing prior to implementation, so looking at what the assets and the challenges of the school may be that could impede or facilitate positive effects. considering how wider school policy can support implementation, and in particular, keeping an eye out for tensions with other policies in the school that may create competing priorities. Taking a cross-level approach, meaning in the classroom as well as across the whole school. Actively engaging the wider community, including parents and families. Focusing on professional development for teachers to support them with implementation. Putting good, sustainable, and relevant monitoring systems in place to keep track of progress and to allow for adjustments as needed to provide the information to inform those. And ensuring that sufficient time and resources are invested to allow for implementation to be successful.
So let's hear a bit more about what the impact study has to tell us about effective strategies for fostering student wellbeing. To summarise what Dr. Lindorff told us in the video, the strategies linked with positive outcomes for implementing whole school approaches to wellbeing are tailor to and account for your specific school context. Take an integrated cross-level, that's school and classroom, approach. Actively engage the wider community as relevant, including parents and families. Focus on professional development for teachers to support them with implementation. Put monitoring systems in place to keep track of and adjust implementation as needed, and ensure that there is sufficient time and resource available. So before we look at these strategies in more detail, we're going to run another quick poll to find out how many of these whole school approaches your educational establishment adopts. So Sean, if you could please start the second poll. And do please select as many options as apply. Once you have answered, you can see the results of the poll by clicking on poll in the right hand of your screen. So I'm just going to wait a couple of seconds. I can see the numbers going up very quickly. Okay, well, it looks like, which is really encouraging, most of you have answered that you've got professional development in place for teachers. In fact, that's nearly a third of you, which is fantastic. We also have a smattering for a whole school approach, actively engaging in the wider community, and only very, very few of you who have none of these strategies in place. So that's absolutely fantastic. Sean, could you please close the poll now? So now we're going to look at these approaches in more detail. Firstly, ensure that any initiatives are tailored to and take account of the specific school context. Assess current school policies and strategies in order to identify the strengths and weaknesses and where you need to focus. Recognise existing good practice. It may also be useful for schools and teachers to take stock of what interventions and initiatives are being run alongside the whole school strategies to promoting student wellbeing, and consider what tensions might arise as a result. So basically, you don't want to be doing too much at the same time. So for example, is the school geared up to do both of these things? implementing targeted responses, for example, for an at-risk group, and connecting appropriately with behaviour management approaches, for example, taking time to model and teach positive alternatives to, in inverted commas, difficult or problematic behaviour. Ensure that there are robust policies and practices in place to tackle key areas such as behaviour, anti-bullying and diversity, including tackling prejudice and stigma around mental health. Secondly, make sure that as well as a performance culture, there's a focus on well-being and embrace a growth mindset. We need to teach children and parents that it's not just about attainment, it's ultimately about enjoying the process, overcoming challenges and embracing failure. Happy students will naturally develop and improve their concentration, motivation and energy levels. So by focusing on improving their well-being, they are more likely to be in a positive place to embrace learning, and good results are likely to follow. Thirdly, well-being impacts all learning. It isn't something that can be separated from math, science, reading and any other subject. It needs to be integrated as much as possible across all disciplines. Research indicates that interventions yield the most successful outcomes when they are integrated into daily practice and school culture, when they seek to engage students and staff and reinforce behaviours outside of the classroom, such as in hallways, playgrounds, etc. Develop a supportive school and classroom ethos to build a sense of connectedness, focus, purpose and warm relationships. Make sure that there is an acceptance of emotion and vulnerability, along with a celebration of difference. Finally, and importantly, the teaching of social and emotional skills will help students to develop the life skills that they need now and for the future. Any initiative, such as wellbeing, needs encouragement and support from senior managers and leaders to give it the best chance of success. Jane will talk us through a few more strategies that were demonstrated to work in the evidence analysis and which we believe are applicable to other contexts.
Thanks, Penelope. So our next point is around engaging the wider community. So wellbeing at school is everyone's responsibility, including the students themselves. We need to consider wellbeing in different contexts and understand that sometimes responsibility for promoting wellbeing lies outside the educational establishment. There is only so much a school can do to support a student's wellbeing if they live in an unsafe environment, for example. To best promote wellbeing in schools, consider an approach where you involve a mixture of voices, right from teaching staff to parents and students, to truly resonate with the school community and to get to the core of what it means to them. Some recent research by Barry in 2017 underscores the importance of doing this within the development and the design phase of any school-based interventions and approaches. In particular, engage pupils, parents and carers as much as possible so that they are on board and wellbeing can continue at home. Coordinate work with outside agencies when necessary, and particularly for those pupils in difficulties and whose families may feel blamed and stigmatised. Research from Australia also suggests that an emphasis on relationships may be key to successful efforts to support and promote student wellbeing, including those teacher-student relationships and relationships inside and outside of school. And finally, don't forget to contact other schools engaged in similar work. So collaborative practice within and between schools can be illuminating and provide that much extra needed support. It can just provide so many ideas as well. So it's really worth speaking to other schools and teachers to find out what they're doing and what's working. So now I want to talk about professional development. So some people, or some teachers even, may be concerned that they do not know how to address well-being. In fact, many teachers are actually already teaching for well-being of sorts, so even if they're not conscious of it. For example, if you teach in a way that aims to reduce student anxiety or promote self-esteem or enhance their motivation, as I'm sure you all are, then you are in fact already finding ways to teach for student well-being. Of course, there is always more that can be done. So it's really important to raise staff awareness around the widespread nature of mental health problems with children and young people. And it is the school's responsibility in helping to identify them and intervene early where possible. Support them in helping pupils cope with predictable life changes and transitions. And that's very much based on a sound understanding of child and adolescent development. Keep abreast of new challenges posed by information technology, such as social media and cyberbullying. And we hear about this stuff all the time. And I know some of you have raised it in the Q&A. It's obviously a big area, and especially at the moment with the constant use of digital learning and that access to digital devices. It really is obviously a key area of concern. So it's worth keeping abreast of the solutions that are available to help combat that. So develop and enhance leadership relevant to mental health and wellbeing at various levels of the school. And one of the ideas is actually to have wellbeing champions across the school, and to make sure, obviously, that they have a voice on the senior leadership team. So it's all about sort of encouraging them to identify and share any best practice that's happening across the school or even in other schools. There are also plenty of resources and personal development training programs available to support schools on how best to implement wellbeing, both from a whole school perspective and from a teaching perspective. And we'll recommend some research and some things to look up at the end of this presentation. But there is a vast amount of stuff out there. So it's worth, having a look and getting some recommendations from other people. If staff, it's really important, because if staff can understand and identify the signs and triggers of any concern, it will help with recognising the need for early intervention. And we all know how important that is. Of course, most importantly, we need to ensure that time and resources are in place to support any implementation. Otherwise, it just won't happen. So supporting students' problems without the skills or the time or the credibility even to do anything will impact staff emotional well-being as well. And that kind of leads me on to the final point, and this has come up in the Q&A at least a couple of times already, that of course, don't forget to take care of teacher well-being too. So teachers, as we know, often put their work and their students first, and it's very important to remember to take time out for yourselves, both in and out of the classroom. If you are in a good health mentally and physically, then you are much better able to cope with the challenges of teaching. And when you feel positive, you are more open to new ideas, creativity and change, making you more effective and innovative in the classroom. Plus, if you're able to embrace well-being yourself and find out what works for you, then you're able to pass that on to your students as well. And let's face it, happy teachers make for happy students, right? So next I want to talk about monitoring systems. I will probably all go, oh. But it is really important to have monitoring systems in place. There is no point implementing wellbeing interventions if you can't tell if they're working. So it is important to note here that there's no one way to measure wellbeing. And as we heard earlier, everyone defines it differently. So schools just need to take time out to think about which aspect of wellbeing is especially important for them to focus on and improve, and then find the right way to track and record progress over time in relation to this. So a useful starting point is to assess your current policies and strategies and how they could better support positive emotional wellbeing and build effective early interventions. wellbeing initiatives do need to be frequently monitored and evaluated against some agreed criteria. But you can draw evidence from a wide range of resources, from pupils, parents, even the wider community. And it's really worth considering which data will provide the most valuable insights to track those characteristics that your school values. So no single metric, I'm afraid, will necessarily give you an answer. So you might need to collect data from a variety of resources, as we've mentioned. So that could be engagement in class, it could be tutor feedback, it could be a student survey that you put out. And then you need to think about how you can make it easy to collect that data, and ensure that ideally any reporting fits in with some current reporting practices, because what we don't want to do is unnecessarily add additional workload. And then what's really key actually is that it's not always necessarily about what you measure or how you measure it, but actually instead it's about what you do with the data. What will you change because of your findings? How will you improve the positive impact of the intervention methods you're trying? Will you make any changes? Will you involve parents? What will you do with that data now you have it? And just ensure that those metrics and goals are shared with everyone involved, students, teachers, parents, focus groups, the champions. And ideally before you decide on what to do next. So, get their input, share the data, get their input, and then decide on what to do next. And school leaders and teachers who do wish to reflect on wellbeing approaches are actually encouraged to use robust data over longer periods of time. So this could be from the beginning to the end of a student's attendance at a school. It could be across different stages or phase transitions. These will be far more effective in measuring improved effectiveness, in contrast to evaluations that only last 1 or 2 years. And this came out very strongly in the research findings. And finally, and most importantly, probably, ensure that you celebrate small steps and any successes that you make along the way. Acknowledging and valuing these achievements make a huge difference, and it really kind of motivates everyone to want to do more. So that's really, really key. So we have covered the key points for ensuring successful implementation and wellbeing strategies. And we are actually coming to the end of our presentation now. So we're just going to do a little recap on what we've covered. So without doubt, we all know that wellbeing is important. And as we have seen, it can help students learn how to build more positive relationships, gain skills in managing their emotions and behaviour, maintain a healthy body and mind, and develop and improve concentration, motivation, and energy levels, all of which are beneficial not only for personal well-being, but also to their studies. So our impact study noted that there is evidence of a link between well-being and attainment, and between whole school approaches to well-being and attainment, but that it did depend greatly on implementation. There is also evidence that these relationships hold true across different contexts and countries, although there is some variation and more research is needed over a longer period of time. And what we did find out is that actually to ensure successful implementation, it is worth considering the following things. So tailoring it to your specific school context, taking an integrated cross-level approach, actively engaging the wider community, focusing on professional development, putting monitoring systems in place, and of course, ensuring that sufficient time and resources are available. And without a doubt, it is far more likely to work if it is supported by senior leaders. So if you would like to find out more information about the impact study, then we have got a dedicated page on our Oxford Impact website, which you can see on the slide. And we will share this afterwards. And if you go there, you'll find the full study report. There will also be a summary report made available within the next week. There's also a really useful infographic up there summarising some of the key findings. And you'll also find a longer version of the video that you saw of Dr. Ariel Lindorff, where she actually talks about the impact study and all of the research findings. So it's about 7-8 minutes long in total. And also on this slide, we have pulled out a few key recommendations of some research papers which you might want to read. The first 3 are available free. The last 2 are payable, I'm afraid, and they will be in the handout that we're sharing with you after this presentation. I can, in particular, highly recommend the first one, which is a whole school framework for emotional and wellbeing and mental health. It's a brilliant free resource, and it provides advice for school leaders, bringing together, there's some practical support, there's some tools in there, there's lots of guidance on creating both sustainable and manageable responses to emotional wellbeing and mental health needs, looking at both students and staff. So a really valuable piece of research. So finally, all I have to say is thank you so much for listening and engaging with us today and answering the polls. We know this is a relatively new topic, and we hope that we have inspired you in some way to give this some thought and to take forward a few initiatives of your own within your own educational setting. See if we can move ourselves towards that embedding it across the whole school approach. And now, yes, Penelope are available, hopefully, to answer some of your questions.
Thank you, ladies. You've got about 6 or 7 minutes for questions. So if I can remind you to click on Q&A and then on published. And when you've chosen a question to answer, if you could give the name of the question setter and just repeat the question as well. And just to the audience, Jane did mention a handout there. If you look at the handout pod, I have just released a handout for you. So you should be able to download it. If you can't download it, don't worry, it will be in the follow-up. Okay, Penelope and Jane, back to you for the questions and answers then.
Great, thank you. And thank you for posting so many questions. First thing to say is we can't get to all of them, but I have noticed that a lot of them will be answered in some of the references we've provided. There's also lots of questions on teacher wellbeing. And again, I think at the end of our slides, you will see that there is a book that's been written on teacher wellbeing. So hopefully that will answer some of them. So I'm just going to take 2 very quickly and then pass over to Jane. So Ferris A has asked, what are your tips on maintaining student wellbeing and academic attainment during the digital era? What I would say about that, of course, is it's early days. This particular research that we were looking at, carried out by Dr. Lindorff, didn't particularly look at that. But what I can tell you is that at OUP, as part of the impact research that Jane and I work on, we've been doing actually quite a number of impact studies around professional development and how we're learning to support adult learners, other learners in the digital era. So I would say it's early days, but it's coming. And then I saw another question from Lena W, who says, how can I get my team to be aware of the importance of wellbeing in lesson sessions? So again, I think just sort of wrapping up some of what we've said. So when we talk about a whole school approach, it's so important that the senior leadership believes in this, wants it integrated, supports you, provides you with the support, professional development that you need. And I think it's with that, and with like it's also like a culture shift. With that, you're going to have the strongest chance of integrating that within your lessons. So I'm going to hand to Jane now, who will pick out a couple of other questions for you.
Yes, of course. Thanks, Penelope. Yeah, there's a question from Hafsa about school management. So what about school management as it affects a lot of teacher wellbeing? Which things should they add as a priority for their well-being. So this is kind of an area we covered a little bit. So it's really about what's right for your school and what's right for your establishment. So it's about sitting together, I think, as a group and deciding which areas to focus on, which are going to make the biggest difference within your school. So once you've taken that assessment, you've looked at all of your policies and procedures, and you've looked at what you're looking to achieve from implementing wellbeing within your school. It's then about pinpointing the areas that you want to focus on that are going to make the most difference. And then it's about being able to put some interventions in place around those and then measure them to see if they are working. And there are some useful tools. So I mentioned that piece of research at the end. There's some really useful tools in there actually to help you do a staged approach to implementing wellbeing within your school. So it's really, really useful. So that's definitely worth having a read. And there's lots about student wellbeing as well. One of the resources actually that we're going to share with you at the end, and there's a link to a little web page that we've set up, is that ELT have created is a document around a focus paper around student wellbeing as well. And there's lots of useful hints and tips in there around how you can actually approach student wellbeing and improve their emotional support. So I would highly recommend reading that. It's a really good piece of resource with lots of useful information in it. Have we got time for another question?
Yeah, you're doing well. You've still got about 3 or 4 minutes. You're
Okay,
answering them very efficiently.
Penelope, do you want to take another one?
Yeah, I can see one here. So Simonette B, what if the Oxford International Curriculum be an agenda for a universal curriculum? Is this a possibility? So great question. So first of all, I mean, the Oxford International Curriculum is being developed at the moment, so it's not yet published, but I know that the team that we worked with who are putting the curriculum together have very big plans for different territories. So I think at the moment they're piloting the curriculum with a number of schools all over the world, and probably including an awful lot of the countries that you're from. So watch this space. I think if it goes down really well, that they're going to want to do that. Back to you, Jen.
Great. Yeah, there is a theme sort of coming through about engaging senior management teams, and actually what I would do as you know, if you're finding that it's not an area of focus within your school at the moment, but you know, clearly you want it to be, it's really important, then it's definitely worth raising with the senior management team. And we have created a detailed handout off the back of this presentation, which is available at the website, which we'll share in the summary handout at the end. And so it might even be worth just printing that off and, you know, taking that along to a meeting with your senior management team and then just talking through it. So just highlighting why student wellbeing is so important, as we discussed near the beginning, and then just some of the approaches that can be adopted to ensure that you can, you know, have some successful strategies in place going forwards. So hopefully that document will provide a really useful resource for you to be able to then go and engage with the senior management team and have those really useful discussions to kickstart, hopefully, some successful ideas and implementation strategies.
And just to build on what Jane was saying there, I mean, we were just talking to you about, you know, one particular piece of research, but an awful lot of the wider educational research finds the same things, which is you need senior leadership buy-in. You've got to integrate it throughout the school. There mustn't be too many competing priorities, and you've got to have the resource and support to take them forward. And those are by no means always, of course, in place. So if you like, you could see what we've been telling you today is just a tiny piece of a bigger jigsaw of evidence, which is all sort of pointing in the same direction.
Absolutely. I think that's probably a good place for us to stop right now. I'm sorry we've not been able to answer absolutely every single question, but I'm hoping actually that with the resources that we're going to provide you following this presentation, that you'll be able to find a lot of the answers within those. Thank you so much for listening. It's been really, really good session. I hope you found it too.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you both. So just to remind people, I know some people are struggling, not everybody will be able to download the handout. It depends what device you're on for it, but if you click on the download button, it will probably work. If you're on a mobile device, it won't work. Some people have said you need to refresh the page to get it, but don't worry, because it will be sent in a follow-up email as well. We are about 3 minutes away from the room closing down, so there's a good chance to, I know most of you have probably done it, a good chance to say thank you to our speakers for this session, the penultimate session of ELTOC 2021. So Penelope and Jane, thank you both very much. If you want to turn off your cameras, etc., you can do now. You are released. Have a good have a good rest of weekend, and thank you very much for the session. There is one session to go, so just remember the room will automatically close, and that is coming up very shortly. We can see a countdown, but you can't. So again, just to remind you, when the room closes, those of you who have signed up for Sarah's session, you will automatically transfer over to that session. If you haven't signed up for Sarah's session, then you will be taken to a landing page. And thank you very much for joining us for ELTOC 2021. I'll take this time to remind you that the recordings for each session will be available. They'll be notified about them and sent emails about them once they're all available, and you don't have to have registered for every session in order to get the recordings. They will go up. There is a certificate which will be sent to you within 5 to 10 days of the conference. So there is a certificate just for attendance. So it doesn't matter how long you have attended, you will be there. We'll see you in the next webinar as well, Isabel. I'm looking forward to it. I can see they're all set down. Looking at my other screen there, they're all ready for you. So you'll be joining them in just about a minute's time for the final session of it. Of the conference. So as I was saying, you will get a link to a certificate, you will get a link to the recordings. Not every session has a handout. I know some people are asking about that. There are only 2 or 3 of the sessions over the whole conference that actually have a handout, but you will get get those in follow-up emails, and you will get copies of slides and everything there for it. So get ready to move. There are 1,200 of you about to leave this room and move to another room. You can imagine that it actually happening in a conference. It looks like 1,200 people just pick up their chairs and all walk to another room in one go. It's a very strange feeling for it. If you are leaving us, thank you very much for joining us. It's been a pleasure to have you here for the last 3 days. There have been thousands of you joining us from all around the world to enjoy ELTOC 2021, our 3rd running it. You get a certificate for the attendance. So if you've been here for 1 session, 12 sessions, I think it's 16 sessions in all, then you'll get a certificate for attending any part of the conference. That's it. You'll only get that one there. Whoever said they can't download the handouts, that's the way that you'll get it in the follow-up. Here you go. 10 seconds until we disappear. So goodbye, and see you in the room for the final session